we have already hit the ground running, although thank you, Devin. Yes, we are recording this to share with everyone who couldn't make it. So a couple of updates. As I said, we have started our planning for the forum. We meet with the Global Planning Committee once a month. At the same time, Ivy and myself are also reaching out to member states and meeting with member states to start the advocacy. As some of you know, Susan and Erica Higby are the co-chairs along with Ivy on advocacy and research. We are putting a lot of importance on advocacy this year because, as you all know, we as civil society did an amazing job last year with our forum. We gathered 27,000 people and we actually achieved a lot within ourselves. But as most of you know, we were disappointed at the outcome with all the voices that we were bringing into UN. We still did not get everything that we wanted with the outcome document. So we are putting a lot of importance into advocacy and working methods of CSW. We've already met with at least, I think, about 5 or 6 member states, 3 of whom are on the Bureau and are really heartened. We're excited that we do have a very strong Bureau and committed member states who want to work with us in a progressive way. You also know that UN Women has a new executive director. If you have not seen the letter, I do want to share that. Let me get to that letter first. So I can share it with you. I'm sure most of you saw it, but we are happy to hear her, you know, show her alliance with civil society. As you all know, we do have a very close relationship with the civil society section of UN Women, and we're very happy that they are encouraging her to make sure that civil society is not left behind as she does her work as the head of UN Women. The other thing I wanted to mention, along with the advocacy that I mentioned, the expert group has released their concept note, and I will share that as well for all of you. I think it's very important that we are on top of what is being recommended to the Secretary General's office. And from our meetings with member states, we have learned that it is really important to voice what are the, the most important points for us for the zero draft, to recommend them ahead of the zero draft. So our advocacy and research group is speeding up their research and recommendations so that we can deliver those strong messages to member states and Secretary General and UN Women ahead of the zero draft. So if any of you have very strong opinions about the topic, climate justice, please do mention it in the chat here, reach out to us, give us any kind of research results that you have or strong points that you don't think we should compromise on. Please do share those with us. We will include them as we move towards CSW. Let's see, another thing I wanted to mention, I will definitely check the messages after I'm done talking about all of these issues. If you have any questions, also please put them in the chat. I'll pay attention to it. I was also told by our colleagues at UN Women to mention the 25th anniversary of the UN Trust Fund, and here's the link for that. I'm sure many of you received these anyway, but I'm just highlighting what is relevant to us, right? So thank you. Okay, I see Devin is racing for links with me too. All right, so it's only 1:09 and I have shared my information as was on my notes. I am going to invite a few minutes early both Rosa and Pamela, the co-chairs of our forum, who are doing an incredible job so far with our global planning committee, so that you can learn more about what we're doing for the forum. Oh, before that, I'll just quickly mention that we are still 100% virtual, just so that everybody knows. We will not encourage anybody to travel to New York City, considering the risks and also the lack of access to many of our Global South advocates. So everything that we do around the forum will be virtual, including consultation day. As you all know from the background of my Zoom, this year is the 50th anniversary of NGO-CSW. So we are planning some local events to celebrate the 50th anniversary, and we will do our best to also live webcast those, including the consultation day. We, as you know, canceled our event 2 years ago, which was supposed to be Beijing Plus 25 at the Apollo Theater. And we're thinking of going back there to use up our deposit there, because we are a volunteer nonprofit organization that needs to save every penny we have. So if we do those, we will make sure to live webcast it so that nobody feels left out and you celebrate with us live. So that's the news from me. And I'm going to hand over the mic to Pamela. And please do use the speaker highlights so that you guys can see the speakers individually. Pamela and Rosa, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Huri, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. I'm Rosa Lizardi. I'm with the Feminist Task Force and SED, and I am thrilled to be here as one of your co-chairs. We're going to be giving updates on the NGO-CSW forum. So before we get into that, I also want to bring on my fellow co-chair, Pamela Morgan, to say hello. Are you there, Pamela? I know Pamela was having some technical difficulties. We even have those here in New York City. So let me. Oh yeah, now we can hear you. Say hi.
Yes. Okay, thank you. Hello, everyone. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning. I'm so pleased to see you here for our October NGO-CSW meeting. I'd like to remind everyone that on November 3rd, NGO-CSW New York will host our first ever CSW Open Forum, which will run from March 14th to 25th, 2022. We are extremely fortunate that South African Ambassador Joyini, who chairs the CSW 66 Bureau, will join us and bring greetings. Additionally, we'll have a speaker from UN Women who will work with our own Huri Getalikian to help us better understand how CSW and NGO CSW are complementary events. Technical aspects of the forum platform will be reviewed, as well as nuts and bolts overviews of the NGO CSW 66 forum and critical information on the more academic side of CSW, which will provide all of the attendees the overview of documents and terms referenced in CSW 66. Very often, we use terms such as zero draft and agreed conclusions and terms that, unless you've been here for a while, you really don't understand. So we hope to break all of that down and make it much easier for you to digest, and also give you a roadmap on what to research so that your time at CSW 66 is well spent. The registration link can be found on November 3rd on the events calendar. So go to November 3rd on our website, and Devin will also put the link to registration to the open forum in the chat. And we'll take questions right before the panel. Thank you. I'll now turn it back over to Rosa.
Thank you, Pamela. And just to advise everyone, all of this information that we're going to be presenting today can be found on our website or in your inbox if you've signed on to receive our email updates. And if you haven't, please do. So I'm going to take you through a list of updates, we don't want to overwhelm you with all this information. So we'll give you bits and pieces. And again, please know that at every monthly meeting, we will be providing updates. So first of all, I just want to do a shout out to our all of the people who are helping on the subcommittees for the NGO CSW Forum. We are happy and thrilled to have our sister NGO CSW representatives from around the world, from Latin America and the Caribbean region, from the MENA region, from Africa, from Asia Pacific region, and the NGO CSWs from Geneva and Vienna are part of our global planning committee. We also have representatives from our NGO CSW Executive Committee who are heading many of the subcommittees that we have, including the Parallel Events Subcommittee, Orientation and Advocacy, the Conversation Circles, Advocacy and Research, the Communications Team, the 50th Anniversary Team, Artisan Fair, Exhibit Booth and Virtual Handbook Subcommittees. Everyone who is involved in this work, we thank you so much for all your work. As was mentioned, we're having our NGO CSW Forum from the 14th to the 25th of March. We're highlighting the CSW priority themes, which are achieving gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls in the context of climate change, the environment, and disaster risk reduction policies and programs. And let us not forget our review theme, which is on women's economic empowerment in the changing world of work. So first of all, I want to update you on our parallel events. The virtual parallel event application is now open. It was opened on the 15th and will be open until the 15th of December. So you have quite a bit of time to put in your side events. Acceptance and confirmation of the event will be on a rolling basis with all final confirmations made by January 15th, 2022. And on the website, there is information about if you have changes to your event. The fee is $125 US dollars for one event. And any and all information, including the application, is on our website at www.ngocsw.org. All of this, I hope you will see in the chat that our wonderful office manager and coordinator, Devin Ziegler, is going to be putting into the chat. And we also thank Devin, who is always keeping us on track and creating miracles with everything that we're putting together here. We also have information about our exhibit booth and or handbook ad. That information is on our website, and applications for that are open, and we would love for you to promote your organization or your parallel event, or use that space to engage with the NGO CSW Forum attendees. If you apply for an exhibit booth, you will have access to your organization being featured on the NGO CSW Forum portal. And just to note, we are going to be using the same online portal that we used last year, the Pathables portal. And we're going to be referring to that portal as the forum portal, as opposed to any other online Zoom or other services for your events. Your organization can be featured in this exhibit hall. You can have a landing page for your organization. You can upload your logo. You can put in your description of your organization. You can upload handouts, material, resources, and you can even have discussion areas in your section. So I encourage you to please check that feature out. We will also be having the conversation circles as we did last year. More information on the conversation circles is forthcoming. The conversation circles will feature more of an in-depth look at specific issues with climate change, environment, disaster risk reduction, cross-cutting on some of those. We will also be providing information soon about the Artisan Fair, where we can feature global artisans who support NGOs and women-focused initiatives. They will be invited to sell their goods through the virtual platform, and the proceeds will go to the artisans and their organizations. You will also be receiving soon information on what the advocacy subcommittee is organizing. And Huri mentions that recently, earlier at the beginning of our session, but the advocacy committee is also putting together a resource list with documents to supplement your reading for those who are new to the CSW, or for those who have been doing this for a while, to look at the priority themes of climate change, environment, and disaster risk reduction. So please look out for that. I know that there's probably a ton of questions in the chat, and I hope that Devin and my colleagues will be helping in that. I will take a look at the chat once I'm done, and we'll be answering in the chat. But for now, I think we might be able to take a few questions. Let me hand over to Pam to see if there are any other points to highlight and to help us out with the Q&A.
Rose, I think that you were very comprehensive in covering it, so I think we can go right to the Q&A.
Okay, so if anyone has a very brief and precise question that they would like.
There's a question from Beth Blissman. She wants to know if two organizations can split an exhibit booth. And we know that they can. They have to come together and work it out. But we know that they can certainly share the cost of an exhibit booth.
Yes, and we can do it mechanically, technically. I think that is gonna require that those two organizations are able to organize and put in for the required material for that. Any other questions? Okay, here's a good question. There was a question, what opportunities do you envisage there will be for young people to participate in the CSW? Well, let me just make one distinction, and this is something that the orientation and advocacy committee is going to work really hard to do. We want to ensure that people understand the difference between the NGO CSW forum and the CSW, the UN CSW, the Official Commission on the Status of Women. So what I'm going to do is take this question from Hannah Graham and apply it to the NGO-CSW, which is what we are speaking of in this session. Let me just say that, first of all, the Global Planning Committee, for every region, there are at least 1, 2, sometimes 3 youth who are part of their regional planning committee. So we have integrated the voices of youth, not only in the decision-making and in the planning. And the subcommittees that I listed earlier also have youth. Many are involved. We are going to ensure that youth are involved in conversation circles, and that they are also involved in the different aspects of the NGO forum. So if you have any further suggestions, please let us know. If Pamela, you have anything to add, or Hurry, but just to say our diversity is our strength, and we want to ensure that the voices of young people are included.
And let's remember that we have the young leaders, young professionals, where we have over 2,000 youth that interact with NGO CSW all the time. And Devin and Safira and are just fierce leaders. So I think that gives youth a good landing place. There's another question that wants to know, what are the limitations of the different activities of parallel events? Should it be panel with speakers, workshop-based, or any other type of advocacy event? And this is probably our last question, because it's 1:26 and we have to turn the floor back to Hootie at 1:30. So who would want to broach that? Devin or Rosa or Hootie? Who'd want to answer that?
I can definitely jump in. So your last question, I have 3 questions in my head that I want to respond, I'm seeing here, but Pamela, you wanted me to address which one?
What are the limitations of the different activities of parallel events?
Okay, so I'll jump right in, and I want to thank you, Rosa and Pam. I am the smartest woman to have you lead our forum. I'm going to take credit for that, but you guys are amazing, and I can't wait to hear more from you. So just so that everybody knows, every month you will hear updates from Pamela and Rosa on the forum. As far as parallel events, I love that question, because I actually challenge all of our members to do things differently as much as possible. Panel discussion is fantastic. We're going to do one today on our monthly meeting, but I think during the forum, I encourage people to be more creative. You know, think of different ways of introducing your ideas. We are open to anything. And I also have learned more and more that sometimes shorter panels that are specific on topics and can deliver the message in a succinct way are a lot more effective than 2 hours of discussion. Now, that doesn't mean that a certain topic where you bring experts together to have a 2-hour discussion is a bad idea. What I'm saying is, like, let's be eclectic. Let's really shake it up and bring different ways of introducing our ideas. And the whole idea of collaboration, I just want to go back to that. I am so 100% for it. As you all know, NGO CSW leads with the idea of collaboration, transparency, and shared leadership. So if we see that in our constituents, we are celebrating, we are happy about that. There was a question earlier about joining committees, and I thank you so much for that question, because we've always had committees that are open and people can join in. Unfortunately, because of the global nature of our global planning committee and the virtual nature of our planning committee, we as a group have said that we need to really limit how many people, because it's hard enough to do this virtually, these meetings, when you're not there in person. Just like member states are complaining about negotiations, not being in person was really a bad idea last year. So they're really pushing for in-person negotiations. We don't know if it's going to happen, but that's what they want. So unfortunately, most of our committees are closed committees. I'm trying to think if for people who really want to join, where they can join, because I hate saying no to people, to volunteers. You all know that. I think once somebody volunteers, they have to be acknowledged and be part of something. So I'll keep thinking about how we can involve more people in our committees. But YLYP is one that I, especially for young people is amazing, because they do so many wonderful events that people should be involved in. I believe these were the questions in my mind that I wanted to respond to. I am going to say thank you again to Rosa and Pamela, and invite Ivy to join me. Mwah. I'll see you guys soon. Thanks for the updates. And somebody just messaged me to say that we just want to be sure that parallel events is the forum, side events is CSW. Sometimes we even slip and switch those words around, but NGO CSW forum is hosting parallel events, and CSW hosts side events. And there was another question which I responded, but I'll tell you anyway. We still don't know if UN will be open in March for civil society. So we are going under the assumption that it will not be available for civil society. Things could change in January. I hope we have COVID under control globally. Unfortunately, we still don't, even in the United States. I check every morning, and this morning it was like the average is 1,000 deaths in Texas, for example. When I see numbers like that, I'm thinking globally, right? NGO CSW is a forum, is a global event. So I have to be really careful and not even assume that we're going to be able to meet in person. So, and as far as UN proper CSW, they don't even know if they will be able to open the doors up for civil society. Member states do want to meet in person, as I said, to negotiate, but that's not guaranteed yet either. Okay, Ivy, I'm going to give the floor to you to start your amazing program. And Devin had posted the program, we'll repost it again. And Ivy, you have the floor. I'm going to stay on just in case. Do we have the speakers, or at least one?
We do have floor here, I think.
Do you want to get started by introducing?
I can introduce. I know that her time is also limited today, so I'd like to respect that.
So
yeah, I'll just start moving it along, and I know the other speakers will join us later, so maybe we could just get started, and then as they, and if not, then there's more time for the rest of us to discuss. And so that sounds
absolutely
good, right?
Thank you for working so hard to put this panel together. I know it's a rough week to have this. And by the way, there was a question, if you can address that, about women, peace and security, and youth and peace and security. If you saw that in the chat, if you can refer to that. As you know, we have brought this up with member states on integrating women, peace and security into CSW. So I'll let you handle that one too.
Okay, I didn't see that chat, so
I'll try to find it, but I don't want to distract you. I know you have your program, so thank you again, and the floor is
it's not a distraction. Okay, great. So welcome everybody, and again, I'm Ivy Cook, the vice chair of NGO CSW, and I represent the Soka Gakkai International at the UN. I've been working on this for about 8 years, and I think I'm just now getting to understand things, sort of. This is such a complex space we work in, the United Nations. And actually my master's was in sustainable development and not in gender at all. So when we were talking about climate, I was like, wow, great. This is like this is more of my passion. But anyway, gender is too. But anyway, to combine the two and to have the peace and security aspect is definitely a treat for me. And as Huri said, there have been quite a bit of struggle in behind the scenes to get this together, because I think most of you may know that today is an important day for the Women, Peace and Security agenda, because there's the annual open debate happening as we speak. It's happening. So actually the conflict of, no play on words, but the conflict of that Women, Peace and Security agenda open debate happening, and the speakers that we need for this topic, which we wanted to see the linkages of climate crisis and women, peace and security, and youth and peace and security, is a challenge, because most of those speakers in the peace and security are at the Security Council. Of course, obviously they have to follow this, and so I am asking, actually, we have quite a few, we have 3 speakers today, and they're going to focus on climate, gender, and the peace and security aspect, but we don't have anyone representing the Women, Peace and Security agenda. And I think, though, we're still going to have a very good discussion. And I believe that Flora will probably address all of this anyway when she speaks. But there was some resources that we had linked, and I wanted to call it to your attention because they probably would speak exactly on this important agenda of women, peace and security within climate. So I want to mention those, but I first wanted to talk about the Earth Charter. I'm sure many of you who work in the area of climate may be aware of it, but the Earth Charter was launched in the year 2000. And back in 1987, actually, the Brundtland Commission, which at the time was the World Commission on Environment and Development, had launched a report which was called the Our Common Future, very close to the SG's report that was recently. That was a common agenda, but this was Our Common Future. And that report called for a new charter to set new norms for sustainable development. And that really started a brewing, people started thinking about civil society's initiative around sustainable development. And that's what birthed the Earth Charter. And like I said, that was in 2000. And I will put a link in the chat, in reference to it. But the very beginning of the preamble, I thought was just so fitting. I wanted to start, this was started kind of in the 90s. And they say, we stand at a critical moment in Earth's history, a time when humanity must choose its future. So we know that that's very relevant even today. And I wanted to call on the WILF policy paper that was referenced. And they are talking about the interlinkage between the Women, Peace and Security agenda and the work of the Generation Equality Action Coalition on climate justice, as well as the Compact on Women, Peace and Security. And so this is a quote from them, but it says, sustainability and peace go hand in hand. A just, fair, and livable future will not be possible without a radical transformation of society, and the centering of feminist values and feminist peace into climate action is essential to the healing of our planet and the possibility of a sustainable future. And right now, I actually would like to give a thanks to Susan O'Malley, who made a connection to Susan, and also to Ann Henderson Slade, who did a lot behind the scenes to support me in organizing this. So thank you very much, Anna and Susan. And I am going to introduce the first speaker, who is Fleur Newman. And so she is the Action Empowerment Unit Lead for UNFCCC. She leads the intergovernmental work on gender and climate under the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change and the Paris Agreement. She's also the gender focal point and focal point for women for the UN Climate Change Secretariat. And she actually is a lawyer. She spent 10 years practicing law in the private sector, which including the areas of climate change, sustainability, energy, and international law. And throughout her career, Fleur has been an advocate for gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls. We have the perfect person to have on this panel, I believe. We are so honored that you can find time before COP26 to be with us. Such an honor, actually, and I'm sure there'll be many questions. So Fleur can be with us, for about an hour. And so what I'm thinking is, before she leaves, we definitely set aside some time for you to, I'm sure all of you have some questions to address to her. So I'd like to make sure that you get that in before she leaves. So rest assured that that will happen. And so I asked Fleur some questions, and I told her she doesn't have to get to all of them. There are quite a few, but I'm gonna share some of what I asked her, and she will give a broad presentation around these. But so the word climate change is a very broad phrase, and it encompasses so many different consequences of global warming. So is it important how we frame the issue of climate change? Again, actually, before I go to the other questions, because the priority theme, I think this was obvious to everybody, but I just want to say that the priority theme CSW in March is around climate. And that's why we are, using this as a cross-cutting theme for all the monthly meetings. I think you already knew that, just want to make sure. And how's the climate crisis and security interlinked? And how does this impact women and youth specifically? And what are the greatest barriers, against progress? And how do we ensure our leaders continue to examine this critical linkage of security and climate change through a gendered lens? And will we see wars caused by climate change in the future? Is there hope for peace if global consensus on climate change isn't achieved? And so I'm going to hand it over to Fleur. Thank you again very much.
Thank you. It's an absolute pleasure to be here, and thank you very much for inviting me. I'm actually based in Bonn, so it's the evening here, and that's why I'm actually available to speak. It's a little bit more challenging during my day, but and thank you so much for the questions, because I think they're all great questions. And I'm going to start with the first one because I think it's a great place to start. And absolutely, framing is important because it can be the difference between people relating to an issue or not, and therefore acting on an issue or not. And in the context of climate change, a little bit like sustainable development, the challenge is that it is broad, it is all-encompassing, and climate change affects every aspect, literally, of our economies and our societies. And I think what we need to do, though, is be able to communicate about it in a way that doesn't paralyze people from taking action, and helps them to understand how it relates in the context of their own lives, their own spheres of influence, and understanding that action is possible, that it is possible for us to make the kind of radical shift that we need to make. Your quote at the beginning there was really great, because one of the things that has to be recognized is, or needs to be recognized, is that the systems that we have in place got us to where we are now. And so what we need is systems change. Climate change is a systems issue. It's not, there is no single answer to this. And so we need everybody to understand how it relates to themselves and to their, whether it's government departments, companies, individuals, the public and private sector, civil society need to understand what it means in their own context in order for them to then be in a position to make change. Absolutely, climate change is a threat. I would say that it's not external. Climate change is, what we're talking about is anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions. Anthropogenic means that it's human, it's caused by humans. And so this threat is one that is not, in a sense, external to us, it's one that we've caused. And taking responsibility for that and understanding that decisions and the decisions, the actions, the inactions that we take are going to influence the outcome and the future that we have and the future that our children have. And I think this then goes on to your second question, also a great question, around whether or not climate crisis and security are interlinked and what's the impact then for women and youth. And I go back to the point about climate change being all-encompassing. It's so pervasive that it's interlinked with every aspect of human life now. And that includes issues of security. Climate change is a threat multiplier. We see this in the case of gender equality and the exacerbating of existing inequalities more generally. We also see it in the context of driving scarcity of food, water, habitable climate. And we know that these factors are linked to issues of security, of forced and unforced migration, of conflict, and issues related to gender and youth in consequences of these sort of long-term crises around early child marriage and gender-based violence, and they're all linked, and climate change is going to exacerbate existing areas where there are already issues with flooding or periodic drought or things like hurricanes. All of that is going to be amplified, but it's also going to create issues in places that have not experienced those things in the past. The weather, the climate is changing, and it's changing in different ways in different parts of the world, and that's going to have very different impacts depending on what that is. So I'm not sure if you wanted me to stop or to just go through your questions. So.
Oh, yes. Should we maybe get some questions from the group as well and then sprinkle them in, and then
Sure.
we could continue on as well to see if there's I don't know if anybody wanted to ask something at this point or would like yes, to ask Fleur. You can raise your hand and I can call on you. If not, then we're gonna just continue with the other questions. So there is one from Claire in the chat. It says, how would you like to see a feminist climate agenda be promoted at COP26?
Also, great question. One of the things that we've been doing as a secretariat over the last couple of years is that we have engaged with we are a CoLead along with a number of other international organizations and countries and civil society we're a co-lead of the Feminist Action for Climate Justice Action Coalition under the Generation Equality Forum. And we're delighted that the UK presidency has their high-level event, which will be on Gender Day, which is the 9th of November, the second Tuesday of the COP, is linking the Feminist Action for Climate Justice Action Coalition to the decision that was agreed at COP25 on the enhanced Lima Work Programme on Gender and its Gender Action Plan. And what that does is sort of strengthens the two agendas, because it brings in a different lens from the Feminist Action for Climate Justice Action Coalition into the Lima Work Programme. But the Lima Work Programme also has a number of really concrete actions and activities that are expected. So what we would want to see is also a recognition of some of the barriers that was one of the next questions. It was around barriers, and one of the things that the Secretariat does each year is to collect data and report on the gender composition of the national delegations to the UNFCCC, as well as the decision-making bodies and the policy and technical bodies under the Convention and the Paris Agreement. And what we've seen is that there's been no consistent trend, although there is plenty of agreement that gender equality is important and there's a need for gender parity within the climate process, that there hasn't been a trend of improvement in that time. There have been moments where there have been some improvement in some places, but it's not an overall trend. And so, what we've been doing is strengthening that report by adding data to it, and hopefully that will be communicated in a way that it becomes clearer what the challenge is, and the continuing challenge of a forum in which decisions are being made about the future of the planet, and where women's voices are not equally represented. And so one of the things we would hope for is that is acknowledged, and that more deliberate actions taken by countries to actually make that change. So that's an answer to that one question, but there is a challenge in terms of a time like this, where COVID has influenced who is selected because there are limitations to the number of people who can be in the delegations, and that typically means that there are fewer women selected for attending the conferences. This is so we'll see where that goes, and whether or not that's the case for Glasgow as well.
Thank you, Fleur. We can go back to you further. I see that there is another question in the chat about how civil society and the Amazonian, oh, I just lost it, forest. How can civil society intervene to take actions?
To take action in the...
to intervene in actions taken by government to override the protection of extended areas of the Amazonian forest.
Okay, I'm not sure that I'm best placed to answer that particular question, the specifics of that. But one of the things I think that is one of the things when I was saying about the Feminist Action for Climate Justice Action Coalition, one of the areas that is being highlighted is around the need to strengthen protection of environmental defenders, and that includes Indigenous women, in many parts of the world who are at risk of gender-based violence as a result of their work to protect their areas of Indigenous land, but also land that's incredibly important for the rest of the world, not only for those who are living within that land. But I wouldn't want to respond because I just don't have the answer.
There are some other ones that I think would be much more maybe relevant about data gaps and how could we help in filling those. So data is a perennial issue for not only for gender and climate change, but gender equality more broadly. But it's also a focus not only under the Lima Work Program, but also under the Action Coalition. And there is, in fact, a data alliance was one of the commitments that was announced under the Action Coalition. And it's looking to really find a way to bring together civil society, but also organizations who've been working on this data issue for some time, and the idea of sort of this radical collaboration around addressing those gaps. And part of it is gaps in relation to climate-related issues. So that might be, again, it's the breadth of climate change that makes things a little bit challenging, because in every sector you want to be looking at how the climate change is impacting it from a gender lens perspective, and that requires you to have data in areas of transport, or in health, or in but linking it then also to the impacts of climate change, and part of this is also understanding how existing data that is being collected can be applied in the context of climate planning and action. But there are a lot of gaps. So part of this is really also helping statistical the national statistics officers in understanding what would be useful in the context of climate planning, and where it would be useful to have a gendered or sex disaggregated data in that mix. But it's a challenge that has been identified and is being sought to be addressed through the Action Coalition. Great, thank you. I noticed the time is already flying, so this is always the challenge. So what I'm going to do is pause now. I really thank you, Fleur. I may possibly come back to you with other questions. I know you can stick around for just a little longer, and I'm going to move on to Susan Capp, who is also our other speaker, and changing directions a little bit, but still similar topic, which is on the right to a healthy environment. And so I want to introduce Susan before she speaks. And so she directs the program. She's the director of the environment program of the Cyrus Vance Center for International Justice. And she's working with international and regional environmental NGOs to develop cross-jurisdictional pro bono projects in the areas of human rights and the environment, climate change, biodiversity conservation, international humanitarian law, toxic waste, and protecting environmental defenders. And she previously was the chief of the New York City Law Department Environment Law Division. And so she was directing the division in its representation of the mayor of the city of New York and its agencies with respect to all federal, state, and local environmental laws, and served as a senior advisor to the corporation council, deputy mayors, and city agency commissions. She was behind the She participated in the creation of the city's first sustainability plan, PLANYC. I don't know how you would say that. Greener, Greater New York, which I am very appreciative of as a New York City resident. And so I'll hand it over to you. There was a very special moment at the Human Rights Council now a couple of weeks ago or a week ago or so. So you're going to share with us about that. And I also gave you a few questions, and I'll just hand it over to you.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you so much. And hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really honored to have been asked to do this. And it's nice to see everyone and to see so many people who care about all these issues. I think where I'm going to start, perhaps, and I just want to mention the last time I spoke to this group was in 2015, after the Paris Agreement had been signed. And we were very excited then because we had managed to get into the preface of the agreement, very hard fought, but to get some human rights language into that agreement, which while not perfect, actually has proved to be quite useful as a place to sort of say at least someone was thinking about human rights with regard to the Paris Climate Agreement. Anyway, so as Ivy said, I'm Susan Capp, and I'm the director of the Environment Program at the Vance Center. Just want to quickly explain what the Vance Center is. We are an international justice system organization based here. We're based in New York City, but all of our work is outside of the United States. We work on, in my case, the environment, but also I have colleagues from Nigeria who run a program on the African continent. I have a colleague from Haiti who does human rights and access to justice. He's doing a big project that has gotten a lot of attention on women in prison. And then I have colleagues who do a lot of work in Latin America, which I do as well. So one of the things we do is support a lot of the international bodies, including the UN Special Rapporteurs. And that's how my relationship to the right to a healthy environment has evolved. For almost 10 years, I worked with John Knox and David Boyd, providing them with pro bono legal assistance to do all the research to back up the reports that they were issuing, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, on the right to a healthy environment. And I think, you know, a few weeks ago, I haven't been as happy about a UN resolution in a very long time, because led by Costa Rica, the Maldives, Morocco, Slovenia, and Switzerland, but equally important by 1,100 civil society organizations, including children, women, youth, indigenous, all of them. And this is being talked about a lot by both the states themselves, but also the proponents of the recognition of the right to a healthy environment. Without that core group of that coalition, I think the belief is this would not have happened. This group really came together across the globe and insisted that this advance at the UN. And it really, as you may know, this happened on the 8th of October. The resolution is 48/13, and it basically recognizes the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment as a human right that is important for the enjoyment of human rights. Also, at the same time, it's important to know, because you're going to be hearing more about this, is that a special rapporteurship in 48/14 on climate change was established, and they're going to be going now through the process of selecting who that person will be. I'm sure there'll be a fierce competition to get that rapporteurship, but it's very clear, as we know, that environmental degradation and climate change are very much interconnected human rights crises, and that women and youth are among those most deeply affected and who face the greatest risk of harm. An interesting point on the vote that I just think I kind of feel personally that everyone should be aware of. The vote was 43-4. The abstentions were Russia, Japan, China, and India. Interestingly, the UK is on the Human Rights Council right now, and they were going to vote no. Tremendous pressure behind the scenes was put on them, given that they're hosting the COP. And to everyone's surprise that day, they voted yes in this surprise vote with some qualifications, which I think we'll be hearing more about later. The other thing that I think everyone needs to know, because it is very troubling, the US, which is not on the Human Rights Council right now, thank goodness, but the US behind the scenes was opposing the recognition of the right, using these very arcane legal arguments that the US, I'm sure some of you are familiar with, has used through the years. And I don't think we've unfortunately heard the last from the US. There are a lot of, again, behind the scenes meetings and so forth going on with the State Department to try and, to ask the Biden administration how it could be that they are out there talking about environmental justice and so forth and so on, and at the same time opposing the recognition of the right to a healthy environment. The General Assembly will be taking it up in the future. Sometimes it happens that the right is recognized first by the General Assembly and then goes to the council, but in this case, it has happened in the reverse. So what is in this resolution? Basically, the right to a healthy environment has been recognized at the regional and national level in multiple ways. There are 155 states that have recognized it in some form. It exists in constitutions, in legislation, in jurisprudence. As you probably know, Human Rights Council resolutions are not legally binding, but what's important is they really act as a very powerful catalyst. The language that has appeared in multiple UN resolutions through the years, but has never been the recognition of the right. The goal and the hope and the expectation now is that it's going to be a catalyst for more ambitious action, both by the states who already recognize it, which is what happened, 10 years ago. The right to water and sanitation was recognized as a human right, and it has really proved to be very important across the globe in ways large and small. For those states that don't recognize the right, obviously the hope is that it will serve as a catalyst for them in a variety of ways to begin to either take steps in their own countries to have more firm legislation, to put it in their constitutions. I hope for those of you who are in New York, you know that the right to a healthy environment is on the ballot in a referendum here in New York. And if voted yes, it will become a part of our constitution in New York State. So please know about that and tell your friends if you're in New York. So the goal basically of the recognition of the right is to promote a more comprehensive and preventative approach that focuses on women, on children, on indigenous peoples, on people living in poverty, and so on. And the right, really, you need to think of it in terms of sort of two different sort of columns. There are the substantive rights, which are clean air, safe and sufficient water, healthy and sustainably produced food, a safe climate, healthy ecosystems. And then the other set of rights are the procedural rights, which, as you all know, can be just as important sometimes with a right. So that is, basically the right of access to environmental information. For communities, if you're a community in Colombia, I was involved in a case recently where the government wanted to resume glyphosate spraying, and they were not basically providing an opportunity for the communities to gain access to what the plan was. And we participated by putting in an amicus brief challenging the procedural aspect and a violation of the right to a healthy environment as recognized in Colombian law. That's just a concrete example. Then it also includes participation in decision-making and access to justice. So when there is a harm, are you able to bring a lawsuit? Are you able to access and seek a remedy? As we know, these are reflected in many domestic laws, but also in international agreements, these rights, these procedural rights and substantive rights. So that's the Aarhus Convention, the new Escazú Agreement, which is the first environmental rights treaty in Latin America, which is a very important new treaty that has been recently ratified and actually includes sort of the most far-reaching protection for environmental defenders, and was considered a really big accomplishment. So I would just mention another document you might want to know about are the framework principles on human rights and the environment. They're available on the UN site, and they lay out all the obligations of states. They were prepared by John Knox with regard to the right to a healthy environment. And I think, you know, the other hope here is that this recognition of this right will lead really to greater clarity among all the UN agencies, all the different bodies, all the special rapporteurs, and in the Universal Periodic Review process, where it will no longer be the case that it can be said, well, the right isn't recognized here, or we're not clear about what the right is. So that's another wonderful, I think, development. And then I'll add, because I want to address some of the questions that Ivy had posed to me. You know, obviously, the right to a healthy environment is deeply linked to the climate crisis and to the issues of peace and security for women and youth. They are the ones, and I know this through my work, many of the clients I work with fall into this category. For example, the weaponization of water in Yemen as a means of basically, in the context of conflict, either depriving or using water as a weapon. So some of the questions that Ivy had posed to me about, so this question of whether climate change adaptation or mitigation is more important for the security of women and youth. You know, honestly, I don't think there is one answer. As we heard from Flora before, and I share this view, the impacts of climate change are not uniform for all. So depending on where you are geographically, the answer is very different. I used to be very firmly in the mitigation camp, but you know, while mitigation, we've made some progress, it's gained some momentum, but we have all seen it hasn't happened in the way many had hoped and have the scientific panels and communities have told us it should. So, you know, if you live in southern Louisiana or in Fiji or in Yemen, you know, time has already run out. It's not a future event. And those communities, and there's a lot of scholarship and writing and activism around this, they've moved to adaptation. They have no choice. So I think that's just important to
changes already among us.
Keep in mind. So the risks of inaction, that was another question, Ivy. You know, I don't know, I'm sure many of you saw here in the United States today, the White House issued a series of reports from the intelligence agencies and the Pentagon, basically about how the climate crisis is now and is going to exacerbate long-standing threats to global security. It's pretty chilling, I have to say. I haven't digested them in full, but you know, for some time now, a lot of these various organizations of that ilk and saying these things, but I think, you know, it's imminent. And that's why this work is so important that you all are doing. On the question of whether female leaders approach the issues differently, it's really sort of outside my expertise. Doesn't mean I don't have opinions, but I think, you know, what I do see, I think, you know, a lot of the countries led by women, they have been they've faced the reality of the climate crisis and begun to try and engage with different approaches in a way that I think isn't always the case otherwise, but it's not my area of expertise. On the role of NGOs, I have one word, it's coalitions. It's really coalitions. I think, you know, the right to a healthy environment, without this coalition of 1,100, you know, there was a big signing of a document. There was a lot of, you know, getting everyone to work together and to support it. I think, you know, together we're stronger. And I think, especially in the context of the UN situation. So, and then last but not least, I would say, you know, on this question, what does progress look like? I mean, the progress, you know, this recognition of the right to a healthy environment was really, if you had told me 3 years ago, I said I would have, and I was working on it daily. It seemed impossible. And so it's really one of those moments when something that seemed impossible became possible. You know, I think progress is, you know, on a small, the prosecution that happened for the murder of Berta Cáceres, which finally happened after a long time. I care a lot about the issue of environment and human rights defenders, many of whom are women, many of whom are in conflict situations, many of whom do not get the protection they deserve, many of whom are murdered. And there's never, did a lot of work with Global Witness on this issue, trying to figure out whether matters were prosecuted. And the record is shameful. You know, I think the other thing I would say is that, you know, redistributing resources is connected to all of this. And so to the extent we can address, you know, in some of the countries in Latin America where the extractive industries are leading to all sorts of conflict, and also it's happening in some African countries as well. I think, you know, the more attention that is brought to that and the more success, that also will look like progress. You know, it's, I'll be honest, some days it's easier than others to see the progress. And I can just quickly, on that question about in the Amazonian rainforest, there are a lot of, I'm involved in some cases there. We generally work with there's Amazon Frontlines is one of the organizations. There are civil society organizations that bring lawsuits, and the special rapporteurs, especially David Boyd right now, John Knox. I also work with Marcos Oriana, who's the Toxics and Human Rights special rapporteur. They have really made it their best to start putting in amicus briefs in these cases where they argue about the right to a healthy environment and that the country needs to recognize this right, even before it happened at the UN. So, but there are lots of really good civil society activist organizations working on the rainforest. And I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Susan. I know you can stick around a little later. So then what we can do is address questions. People can start thinking now about the questions. You can put it in the chat, or again, you could raise your hand and I'll give space, open the floor for you to ask them. But I do have one more speaker I would like to introduce, a young woman who has founded her own organization. I think you've seen her bio already, but I'm going to share some key things if I can pull this up, my document here. Yes, so Kekeshan Basu is the founder, president of the Green Hope Foundation. She has many prizes and recognition that's listed here. She's a Forbes 30 under 30 and the first ever winner of the Voices Youth Gorbachev Schultz Legacy Award for her work on nuclear disarmament. There's many more things listed here. I'm not going to say all of them. She's also Canada's top 25 women of influence. And so her foundation works at the grassroots level in 25 countries, empowering young people, especially those from vulnerable communities, in the sustainable development process. And she's also the co-leader of the Generation Equality Forum Action Coalition on Feminist Action for Climate Justice. And so I've asked her also to share with everyone how people can get involved with that. And I'm going to turn it over to Kekesha, and she will give her, I think she will do a, she needs to do a screen share. Devin, I know it's already allowed, right?
Host is disabled participant sharing, so.
Oh, okay. So if
it should be good now.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Yes,
Thank
thank you. Thank you, Ivy. Hello, everyone. Great to be here today. And to echo what my fellow speakers have said, living in the age of the Anthropocene, literally every facet of our survival, our lives, and our futures are dependent upon the evolving climate change crisis, its manifestation, and it's kind of as if we've woken up a monster which we have no control over, and at all times we're trying to scramble for our safety. So in this era of science and technology, we have all the data that we need to measure how our planet continues to warm, pushing us to a point of no return. And human-induced warming, as we all know, it reached about 1 degree Celsius above pre-industrial levels in 2017 after increasing a rate of 2 Celsius per decade. Now, every year is hotter than the preceding one and bringing with storms, destruction of greater intensity. So grassroots experiences are actually steadily shifting our awareness of climate change from an abstract phenomena of carbon levels and future impacts to something that is more tangible, multi-layered, and intersectional issue, bringing together myriad social, economic, and environmental struggles and solidarities. And with it, there is now an undeniable acceptance about its unequal impact. And I once again echo my fellow speakers, the regions and communities that are worst impacted are ironically the ones least responsible for it. And within them, women and youth being the most vulnerable, and they suffer as a consequence. So reports always state that from successive climate change fueled disasters, women and girls are 14 times more likely to die in a disaster than men, 8% more likely to be displaced by climate change. Climate change is exacerbating the lack of access to land and rights for gender equality. And it's really horrible because in the developing world, access to land is essential for survival, from subsistence farming to a meager source of livelihood income. So land rights becomes another crucial issue that cuts across poverty reduction, food security, development overall. And in this context enters climate change, but not only threatens to impact all these sectors, but also adversely affects women because of discrimination and inequality that limit their access to land and natural resources. And we all have seen how global warming and climate change have been somewhat dominant themes in the Sustainable Development Dialogue since the Earth Summit in 1992 that led to the formation of the UNFCCC. However, over the last decade, driven by the work of non-state actors like us at Green Hope Foundation, the discourse has changed significantly, but not as much as we'd like. As stakeholders now acknowledge that the impacts of climate change are unequal, that they affect countries, regions, communities in a disproportionate manner. And in most cases, they are felt most severely by those least responsible for it. And that is why we need to look at climate change, not just from a planetary lens, but from the human lens as well, and addressing it more importantly from the feminist lens. And this has led really to the evolution of the climate justice movement that highlights its impact on peace, on inequality, societal imbalance. But as I said, there needs to be a greater emphasis and engagement of affected stakeholders So for example, women and girls, especially in those developing nations, suffering more from the impacts of climate change, young people who are amongst the largest stakeholders of civil society too are unequally impacted by climate change. But very few of these people actually have a role at the decision-making table. We've seen how climate change and these disasters have given rise to climate refugees. We've seen how climate change is impacting sections of civil society in the developing world that also have the risk of low economic development. And once again, through all of this, we see how climate change is injustice. So it's really a fight against oppression. It must not be seen separate from other human rights struggles, such as those of peace, gender equality, and social justice. And this can only become stronger if we move away from our silos-based approach and address climate change from the intersectional perspective, so that we stop seeing these fights for humanity as separate and open ourselves up to the possibility of learning from each other and collaborating in deeper ways and really addressing the intersections right there. And that is exactly what my work through Green Hope Foundation focuses on, which I founded Green Hope Foundation when I was 12 years old, because I realized that there was a severe lack of inclusivity of children specifically, and later on we realized young women, young people in the sustainable development process. And it's a demonstration of how each one of us has the power to address this crisis from this localized lens. And it's a real life example of younger coming together with other young people to take grassroots actions to bring about positive change, empowering vulnerable communities who've been impacted by climate change, and complementing it with a platform through which they can influence policymaking at the highest levels of governance, including at the UN. So our work at Green Hope Foundation illustrates the concept of climate justice and its linkages of gender and climate, while at the same time implementing processes on the ground to build climate resilience and identifying adaptation actions such as sexual and reproductive health and rights in conservative vulnerable communities as being an important component of gender responsive approaches to climate action. Now, working with remote rural communities from Suriname to Indonesia, what we noticed early on is that the impacts of climate change, again, are disproportionate effect on those least responsible for it. And of course, them being women and girls, that also increases their vulnerability to abuse and exploitation. And it just exacerbates the existing inequalities and acts as an inequality multiplier, I think, as one of my fellow panelists had said. And another additional complexity that arises from this is that there's still no single set of gender inequality reducing policies with relation to mitigating the impacts of climate change that applies to all countries or in all its contexts. But the main issue does lie with the implementation process that's combined with a lack of intent. And what we've also seen is very often the absence of gender disaggregated data, especially in the global south where most of the work takes place, because that is where it's most affected. And it's kind of this vicious cycle on inequality that gets deeper and more convoluted, disturbing peace and stability of these communities and making the recovery process even more complex. So one thing that's really important for us to remember that gender equality is a multiplier of sustainability, and the inverse also holds equally true. Women have different vulnerabilities to climate change impacts. This may yield varying perspectives on the extent and seriousness of these problems and the best solutions. So defining dynamics within households, including for women, is critical to fully understanding local environmental behavior and its outcomes. For example, during our work in Kenyan villages, we witnessed how climate change impacts freshwater availability, as well as the increase in land degradation, which disproportionately affects women and girls more because the majority of the water carriers, women and children, not only spend a substantial amount of time and physical energy fetching water, but also risk injury and assault. So we've helped to rectify this problem in some of the villages by providing biodegradable water containers that help store the water so that the girls don't have to walk every single day to fetch water and can instead spend that time and energy going to school. In many of the societies, women have traditionally been the keepers of rich knowledge about plants, animals, ecological processes, and we know how the erosion of biodiversity driven by climate change has had specific impacts on women, including losses of knowledge related to seeds, processing, and cooking. So we witnessed this in our work with rural communities in the Sundarbans, the world's largest mangrove forest. And so really addressing this requires climate change mitigation efforts to be viewed and actioned through the gender and feminist lens, empowering women and girls, recognizing their leadership abilities in this context, ensuring that they not only have a voice, but at the decision-making table as well. And this is the mantra that we follow at Green Hope Foundation. Now, obviously, COVID-19 has added to the inequality multipliers that climate change poses. And it's really, again, deepened the inequalities amongst women and girls. And Green Hope Foundation continues to work to address these challenges in rural communities. One of the ways we're doing that is through our solar-powered mobile library system, which is taking books right to the doorstep of over 250,000 children all across the villages. And now we're scaling it up to our 25 country chapters as well, so that the children who are forced to drop out of school, a majority of them being girls, due to COVID-19, are now actually able to have continued access to their education. And since it's solar powered with the light and fan inside, our members provide a reading corner where they help them with their education, continue their climate resilience education in there as well. And these are communities severely affected by climate change. We've started a sewing school in one of the villages in Bangladesh that enables the women and girls who are disproportionately affected by climate to have a stable source of income through this sewing school and selling their products. And we've installed a solar irrigation system, for instance, that enables farmers, including women working in the fields, to practice climate smart agriculture. So for us, these are just some of the actions that we've taken during the pandemic to address this. And, the call for climate justice will resonate even more strongly at just this year's COP. Once again, I think to echo what my fellow panelists have said, because it is really kind of this turning point with the amount of emphasis that is being put on COP to be viewed as the kind of this area of change making. But I think it's, their COP is already mired in controversy with the lack of inclusivity of women from the host country UK that failed to include a single woman in its top level negotiating team. So we really need to change our whole worldview of how we look at climate change right now. We have to start addressing it from the climate justice and gender lens, because really climate change thrives on vulnerability, exploits it in many forms, and as a consequence, one of the prime obstacles in our pursuit of peace and equality and security. And it's something we see every day on the ground, how climate change creates that lack of peace in all of these communities. And this, at the end of the day, is one battle that we cannot afford to lose, because our future literally depends on it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kakishan. I was wondering, because I know you work on the area also of you're passionate about nuclear disarmament as well. And I'm just wondering what the linkage is. One of the questions I had was, how does global military activity contribute to climate change? From your perspective, I know you're not an expert on, on that specifically, but just that and young women particularly being impacted, and just that connection again of peace and security and climate with young women.
For sure. Yeah, no, absolutely. Nuclear disarmament is one of the areas that we work a lot focus a lot on Ag Green Hub Foundation. And I would say that, first of all, the amount of money that is spent on global militarism it's ridiculous, honestly. And I think that if the amount of money being spent there was just focused on ensuring climate justice and solving our world's greatest challenges, we'd already be like halfway, more than halfway towards the targets that we've put in place. Secondly, when we talk about nuclear injustice and link that to climate change, it is also about how the whole process of building nuclear weapons and even nuclear energy, the uranium mining sites are most often on indigenous territory. So whether that's in North America or in Asia or in Africa, it is on indigenous territory. Once again, it is destroying the lands that have been there and the people's lives who've been there for generations and have taken care of the lands. And the uranium mines and the tailings pollute the local water sources. It leads to horrible side effects that's seen through generations. And once again, it's the women who are affected most there. So that kind of nuclear justice is actually what we also work to address at Green Hope Foundation, and ensuring that when we talk about nuclear injustice, it's also seen through that feminist lens, and how that is linked to the climate crisis as well, because it's this whole it's all linked at the end of the day, that these communities affected most by climate change are also being affected by nuclear injustice. And then, even in this whole movement of peace and security, women who've been traditionally seen as peace builders, or that voice is not represented at the highest levels of policy making. I think there are like 17 defense ministers right now in the world, women defense ministers, and out of the 9 nuclear states, it's 1 out of 9. That's France. So I think have that kind of disproportionate gap that's there also plays a very big role in how we view our world's greatest challenges. I think COVID has given us a very good example of how women-led countries actually fared better during the pandemic, really getting to the root of the problem and addressing it right away. So yeah, the feminist lens is really required across all the challenges, and they are all interconnected, so it kind of benefits everyone.
Yes, I agree completely. And actually, this year's the SG's report on women, peace, and security, he referenced something that I found very interesting. He talked about the studies being done. Nearly 100 studies indicate that there's some link. This was a question of, I don't know if it was a paper, does more equality for women mean less war? And the linkage between sex and gender inequality and violent outcomes. He made this, in the report for today's, towards today's open debate, actually, and that there has been a UN Women's study from 1990 until 2019 on the association between militarization and gender inequality, and that military spending is definitely on the increase right now, 2.6% in the last year or two, I believe. No, it was last year. So $2 trillion on military spending now as of 2020, that figure. Anyway, I just wanted to make sure that I mentioned that SG's report, and let me check the time. We have time. So what I wanted to do, because I promised that the audience would have time, and again, thank you to the comments in the chat. I have been reading as much as I can, all of them, and the comment on the diversity of panelists and all of that, and again, we are really doing our best here as a volunteer organization to put together these events as well. And we try our best to make it as diverse as possible. And definitely our Global South voices are very important. The audience, I know we have a very global audience, so I'm sure there are experts among you as well that can speak on this topic or speak on your grassroots activities and efforts. I'd like to give space for that. There was a question though, Susan, that was directed to you that I didn't want to miss. It was something about the space, I think, was it? This right to a healthy environment. And oh, this is the problem. There's so much on chat. Now I've like lost it. I should have copy and pasted it anyway.
I found it. I found it.
Okay.
Is it the question, as the pandemic has increased people's online presence, does the right to a healthy environment? Yes. So that has been an issue all over the place, and I only know what I know. I think it has been addressed. The matter I mentioned in Colombia, the issue is it's a procedural right to have access to the information. And so the sort of right to a healthy environment, including these online spaces, if the question is what's happening, for example, with regard to Indigenous communities, when there is, say, a big project and they're, the government and the developer say they're going to comply with the environmental assessment rules and they're going to have public hearings, they don't, because of the pandemic where some of these things moved online, sometimes people don't have access. So they have to travel a far distance in order to get internet access, and then also to have access in their Indigenous language. So those are some of the cases I know about, and this matter I was involved in where we were making the point that what had been provided was not adequate. And that's a procedural right under the right to a healthy environment. So if I think that's what the question is, and it certainly is included. And I'm familiar with other cases that people have brought. There are other ways, obviously, besides litigation to raise these issues, but that, the information and your access to it needs to be provided in a reasonable way. So I hope I answered the question.
Thank you, Susan. So I'd like to open the floor for any questions or contributions to this topic. If there are any hands, I can't see everybody at this moment, so I'll need Devon's help if somebody raises a hand.
Yes, I see Kupa Kwashe Matangira. I'm sorry if I'm not saying your name right.
That's okay. My question is in regard to the role that young people should play when it comes to addressing emergencies like climate change and even like COVID. What role do you see young people needing to play when it comes to policy making?
Yes, Kekishan or Susan, I don't know if you had any thoughts on that.
I can go first. Well, as a young person myself, I can definitely say that the best way that we at Green Hope Foundation have seen like work influencing policymakers is just continuing the work on the ground. A lot of the time, we as young people are kind of pushed away because of our age, and the only thing that kind of stands for us is the work that we do and the impact that we've made. And just speaking from my personal experience, it's just the work that speaks for itself. So like kind of when we speak to policymakers or like go towards them and say that this is what should be done, or like this is how we can work together in partnership, I think that kind of that really works. And another thing we've seen is that we know it's really important that to not alienate them. It's important to just bring all sectors together and kind of work together towards the addressing and doing away with the common enemy that is climate change. So I think that is really important. And of course, voting, I think that is in democracies, that is a very, very powerful tool. And I think young people must be educated right from primary school about why their vote counts. And I think that that kind of civic education in democracy really, really makes a difference. It's not just about waiting until they're 18 and of voting age to tell them that, yeah, you should vote. It's about educating them from the primary level and saying that that is your right, and that is how we can bring about change at the systems level.
Oh, you know, Kakishan, this reminds me, the Action Coalition. How can people get involved? Because I know it's not just the leadership team that's supposed to be a part of that, right? I believe that anyone can participate in action. Can you explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think as commitment makers, every single person can take part in that. Maybe my fellow AC leader Floor can add to that, but definitely it's commitment makers are the ones. That's what we're looking for, really, and it's that's their call to action, really. That every person, every institution comes forward with their commitments and works to implement them on the ground. So yeah, that's definitely there. It's open to all.
Thank you, commitment makers. We can all be one. So just wanted to mention that. And okay, any other hands? Anybody want to say something? I do see chats, but it is nice to hear your voices too. If you don't want to turn on your camera, that's okay. But voices are a little bit easier sometimes than reading all the text. So I see here Claudia.
Hi everyone. So I dropped my question in the chat, but I think it's gonna be nice to ask it here. So you said that the parallel events will be virtual because we don't know about the civil society participation in the New York. So I wanted to ask if NGOs Forum is thinking about addressing the issue of having the member states' physical participation prioritized at the expense of the civil society engagement only in the virtual settings, because this is again another meeting at the high level in which member states' votes are favored over the civil society. So thank you.
Yeah, that question, and you're saying the NGO Forum, not just about the UN CSW, because
I mean, like any action that wants to tackle the issue.
I know we're really NGO CSW. We do have a subcommittee on advocacy and research, and we've been meeting with member states, and we started with the Bureau of CSW, and we meet with UN Women regularly. And in all those spaces, we are asking for more civil society space, open spaces for us. You know, member states still have the opinion that it's an intergovernmental space. So it's their discussion and we don't necessarily need to be there. I won't say all member states. There's a small percentage of very strong voices that do not really feel positive about civil society engagement. And so this has been the challenge in the CSW as well. And what we do know is that negotiations were very challenged because it was in a virtual setting, and they are trying as much as possible to see that the next year one, so 66, will be in-person negotiations for member states. Again, that's intergovernmental. As far as NGO, civil society participation, that's a big question mark. We still don't know. But again, we continue to advocate for space because of course they need us there. And yeah, we need to, I hope that's addressing what you had mentioned. Yeah, okay.
Thank you, Alex.
Yes, it's our big concern too. Anybody else who may have comment or thought or expertise to share? Hui Yi. Yes, I give you the floor.
Thank you, Ivy.
Yes.
I'm just really new in this. This year I got an opportunity to join my organization, WAX, World Association of Girl Guides and Girl Scouts, as one of the observers through the NGO CSW. But personally, I'm a big fan of healthy food and brain food sort of things. I would like to ask, in personal capacity, how can I advocate or how can I be involved in this agenda? Thank you.
Is it okay also for me to call on the YLYP co-chairs to help answer this question? I would love, since they're trying to get young activists engaged at the UN. So I don't know if Devin or Safira, or I don't know who else, if Saida's on, would that be okay for you to address this question? How could Hui get involved?
I can just jump in here and maybe just share a couple of things that are coming up for the youth leaders and young professionals. So really, this is a group that has been trying to accompany young people exactly like yourself to be able to kind of coordinate and strategize and engage in a meaningful way, particularly at the Commission on the Status of Women, which is coming up in March. So we have a range of events, everything from kind of capacity building and professional development spaces, just to kind of help refine the way that we're presenting ourselves and the way that we are doing our advocacy here at the UN, all the way to more substantive spaces where we are kind of sharing and consulting and thinking through more substantive issues in preparation for the commission, and thinking about what are the spaces out there, kind of sharing opportunities, but then also what might it look like to engage in those spaces much more effectively. So we have a few upcoming events. We have a film screening that's coming up. We have a professional development workshop actually next Wednesday, which is all about kind of young minority women, particularly thinking about how do you present yourself in professional settings, how to articulate the work that you do in a really impactful way. So Devin has put the mailing list in the chat, and you can sign up for the email that comes out. We also have a WhatsApp group. We have a Slack channel. So there are a number of different platforms where you can coordinate, find out what's going on, and connect with others who are trying to do this work and kind of really learn from one another. I don't know, Devin, if there's more that you want to add.
You covered it, Safira. Thank you.
Thank you, Safira and Devin. I see a heart from Hui. Very nice. So yes, I'm still keeping the floor open. I see on the chat some great examples. I did see the Kenyan comment about the planting trees, the efforts that are being made in other countries. Anybody else who would like to take the mic? This is your chance. No? Any other questions to address to Susan or Kekeshan?
I think there was a hand from Aliu.
Oh, yes, Aliu, please. You have the floor. I think I need like 3 screens so that I can see everything. It's so challenging. Over a year of Zoom and I'm still like challenged. Anyway, I don't see anybody else with their hand up. Oh, I see Alice and Aliu. Aliu Dumbuya.
He's muted.
Oh, you're still muted. I can't hear.
He's muted.
I think I'm unmuted now.
Yes, Alice, I hear you.
Okay, I really, I just would like to draw to attention marginalized women, invisible women, disabled women, widows of all ages, the effect of the climate crisis on forced migration, land property taken from widows, marginalized widows, those who don't have access to justice. And I think one of the earlier speakers spoke about climate change crisis through a justice lens. And I don't want to go on too long, but just to say that we do need to do this. We need to look with through a widow-sensitive, marginalized women-sensitive lens at climate change and the impact. If we don't, we miss out a huge swathe of women across the globe. Thank you. Thank you. Excellent meeting, by the way.
Oh, thank you, Alice, and thank you for bringing up widows. It's always important to consider and never forget. I want to try one more time because I know, Aliu, you wanted to talk. Are you able to unmute to speak? Aliu is trying to speak, but
maybe Devin can unmute him.
Yeah, Devin. Thank you, Susan. We can't.
We're trying, it's not working.
Oh, I see. So maybe it's something, the system.
You can only like ask them to unmute. I can't just like turn their mic on for them.
I see. Oh, it's a shame. If you put it in the chat, maybe. I know I said I want to hear the voices and then we can't hear your. Oh, you're unmuted. Now you can speak, Aliu. Oh, but we can't hear you. Yeah, we cannot hear you. So I'm so sorry about that technical difficulty. Tabeth? Tabeth, yes.
Yes, hello. Can you hear me, please?
Yes, now we hear you. Very clear.
Yeah, okay, yes. I am Tabeth Ndoro. Actually, I live in a rural area. The problem that we have, I am in Zimbabwe, but I have noted that especially, what's up in our country, in our rural areas, the elderly people, especially, they bear this brunt of the climate change because they are looking after small children. The mothers are out maybe in South Africa where they are working, but the problem is during this before the rainy season, these elderly women, they travel long journeys to fetch water. So this is our main challenge, really, out in the rural areas where we live. So I don't know how, especially the elderly women, because the young women will have left kids going out to look for jobs out in other countries. So I think this is something to do with climate. Thank you.
Oh, Tabeth, thank you for bringing that up. I see Susan also nodding about this. And
yes, she's describing exactly what is, I think many people, she's experiencing it, but it is exactly who is taking on this responsibility and why women are so deeply affected.
Yeah, and this was covered in there was a report that UN Women put out together with UNEP, UNDP, and DPPA about the linkages, but gender, climate, and security. And they gave many examples all over the world of exactly what Tabeth was talking about, that, workers, seasonal workers are pushed, people have to move because, of water issues. Climate change is impacting women definitely for sure. And so that was also a research that was offered. So I want to make sure everybody pays attention to that. And I also want to say to the subcommittee on advocacy and research, because we are collecting some key recommendations to give to CSW. And we will make sure that we include these kinds of things within the key recommendations. But I know we have a minute and Huri is gonna have us end. But thank you, everybody, for your engagement. And thank you, Susan, and thank you, Kekeshan, for joining us. And yes.
Thank you, Ivy. You pulled off an amazing feat today with these speakers, and I want to thank your speakers on your behalf as well for accepting your invitation. Thank you, everyone who joined. I just want to add one quick comment, and then we can unmute and you can remove this, Devin, the highlight, so that we're all on a screen together. I just so appreciate everyone's engagement, but I always like to end with some sort of solution. We keep talking is wrong with this world, and Hugh, I think I'm not sure if I'm saying her name right when she said, what can we do as young leaders? One of the things I learned earlier on with my engagement at UN is like, it is so important to learn globally, but bring it locally, right? It's good to attend these meetings, learn about what the experts are saying, what is a good solution. And then especially for the youth, and of course this applies to everybody, right? Find out who your local representatives are, write to them, vote, speak up, educate yourself. And Kashan also mentioned about educating even before you're able to vote. So I just wanted to inspire everyone to really take all this knowledge and bring it to your family dinners, to your cocktail parties if you attend, to your schools, to your office water cooler, as we used to call it. I don't even know if we do that anymore, but share this information, speak up and make changes. And I've been texting with my team here. One of the last things I want to say is that, can we even imagine that we can bring global women and girls together and really end militarism once and for all? Just let's imagine that. I do not have the solution for that one, but if we really do think about how we can gather our forces to end militarism, that would be amazing. On that note, at 3:01, I do want to declare this meeting ended and just say, go ahead, unmute yourselves, put yourselves on camera and say your goodbyes until next month. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Again.
Great day,
Bye. See you
everyone.
again.
Bye.
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 Everyone safe and healthy all.
Bye-bye.